Is there a reason I like junk food more than my husband? Let's find out. Hey everybody, it's Femtrooper, and today we're going to be talking about a different topic today, but that still pertains to pop culture and gaming, but it's a look at what it was like to grow up with Canadian or American parents in North America versus growing up with an immigrant parent. The reason I bring this up is I was raised by two, born and raised Canadians, and my husband was raised by immigrants. Both his parents are from France. So he had a different experience growing up with parents who are immigrants than I did, just with parents who were from here and just like full-fledged Canadian. Now, before we get into this, I want to make a few disclosures here. Yes, I do understand there are differences between Canada and the United States, but in general, in terms of what we are discussing today, Canada and the United States are very similar. So we are going to go with that. That's why I'm not just discussing American parents or Canadian parents, or putting them in a category, because in terms of what we're discussing, it is like very on par. The other thing we're going to talk about here is this is all from my perspective as a child in the 90s. So this won't necessarily apply to somebody who is a teenager now or is like 45 now, whatever. This is very specific to my generation. I am a millennial. I'm in the very middle of the millennials. So the way I see it, I'm like the most millennial you can get. So if you want, I define millennials as usually somebody from 1983 to like maybe 96, 95. I know there are people who are very like, it's 1980 to 2000, but I don't really agree with that. There's various definitions on the internet. To me, it's around 82, 83 into that 95, 96. The whole thing is you're supposed to come of age in the millennium, and 9/11 is the event that kind of shaped this generation of millennials. So, with that being said, if you're born in like 1998 or 99, you don't remember 9/11. Realistically, you don't. So, I don't consider somebody born in 99 a millennial. I consider them Gen Z. That also goes with the people who are born in like, that 79, 80, 81 category. They really are Generation X. So, or there is that Zennials, if you want to say. They don't really feel like Gen X. They don't really feel like millennials. So let's just go with millennials as being around 83 to 95. I've heard earlier, but because I am born in the late 80s, I'm kind of like the millennial. You can't argue. I'm not any of the other ones afterwards or before. I am full-fledged millennial. I also want to say, before we get into this, that I am this is all to do with North America. So if you're, in Sweden and your parents are from like Germany and you have immigrant parents, I don't know. I can't speak for that. I can't speak for someone in France who has French parents. They're in a different country, so we're just talking about the North American experience here. So the reason I bring this up is because this is going to make North America sound terrible, but in the 90s, it was, when I think about things I remember and like nostalgia and stuff, a lot of it is like fruit snacks. There's a reason why there's like this whole nostalgia for like Dunkaroos and fruit roll-ups and, all these different, bad sugary cereals, blah, blah, blah. I think about, all sorts of chips and like Doritos and like all sorts of different pop that I used to drink, and it's all bad food. I also think that my parents, kind of let me do anything in terms of video games, watching TV. I watched a lot of TV. So that's where this stems from. I watched a lot of TV. So to those of you who are watching, I want you guys to comment and tell me your experience, because sometimes I don't know if I'm the norm or not, but I have talked to a lot of people who were born and raised in North America with Canadian or American parents, and it seems to be very similar, watching TV was pretty standard. My parents both watched TV a lot. They had lots of sitcoms they liked to watch. We always watched the news at 6. My dad still is a huge sports fan, so we always had, baseball, hockey, football, boxing, like everything. There was always some kind of sports on. If he was watching, we watched movies on TV. We were like huge Blockbuster people and video store people. So always a rental in the house, whether it was for me, whether it was a video game, a movie, just random stuff. Always, engaging in media. And I had a console ever since I was 5 years old. So yeah, like very young, getting a console. My first console was the Super Nintendo, and it's my most nostalgic console. And then we get into N64, and I've had a console ever since. So and I had handhelds, I had a Game Boy Color, I've had the whole thing. So for me, growing up playing video games, I had a TV in my room. We had tons of TVs. We had a TV in the living room, a TV in my room, TV in the basement. My parents had a TV. There was cable in all of those TVs except in my room because they didn't want me having cable when I was like 6, 7 years old. But when I was like 13-ish, then I did have cable in my room because I remember watching South Park at night all the time. I watched a lot of TV. When I was a little kid, you know, in the summer, I'd go to my grandma's house and I would sit and play video games and watch TV constantly. Just the other night, we were at friends' houses and we were naming all the, like, channels, like, what was channel 3, 4, 5, 6, like, all the way up, and it's like, I can still name, like, all the channels from, like, the 90s. I don't know if that's, like, a problem, or, like, I have issues, or if that's just normal, like, I don't know, but I definitely, was, fixated on tons of media. Now, let's turn over to my husband, who grew up with immigrant parents, and that is not the case for him. They had a TV, obviously. They went to Blockbuster and rented movies and all that stuff, but they didn't have cable, so he didn't grow up with cable, and he did not grow up with video game consoles. He did have computers later on, and so he has memories with different computer games that I definitely do not, but he did not play consoles, didn't have like handhelds, didn't have a Game Boy, all that stuff, and didn't watch like TV like the way I did. And there's several reasons for that, but it's just interesting because of the difference in childhood. So it always got me thinking, like, Canadian and American parents were just like, eat whatever you want, watch whatever you want, and then immigrant parents were like, no, that's not the case. And in terms of him not having cable or not having TV, it's not that his parents were strict and they're like, you can't watch TV. It was more or less, I think, you know, you come to a new country and they don't know any of the TV shows and all that, so TV is just not an interest. I have to admit, if I just moved to some other country where maybe I didn't know the language very well, I probably wouldn't get cable either, so it totally makes sense. So he didn't, like, crave TV. It's not like, oh, I wish I had TV, like whether if you took the TV away from me, that was like a severe punishment. And he also didn't have consoles, so what you don't have, you don't necessarily crave, because if you don't grow up with it, like, I don't know, it's just not a part of your life. But it was a part of my life. So then I held a really, really, really shitty poll on Twitter. So yes, it's terrible, like, not exhaustive, double-barreled questions, just the worst. It's a terrible poll. But I was curious. I wanted to ask people on my friends list, because people in real life who have immigrant parents that I've talked to have, you know, they didn't grow up with the same stuff I did, and their parents certainly weren't letting them watch TV for like 8 hours a day. So it's like, is this just a weird North American thing? Like, I'm sitting there eating, like, really bad food. Like, to me, things like, you know, Gatorade, Powerade, Kool-Aid. Kool-Aid was, like, we always had Kool-Aid in the house. Always. And like, lemonade stands, I had Kool-Aid stands, because I wasn't really making lemonade. I think I was making Kool-Aid. We had all of that. There was always, like, chips, like treats, candy, like everything in the house. I always went to school with fruit snacks, so there were things like, this is so dated, but like So Delicious, Fruit by the Foot, fruit roll-ups, just all of Dunkaroos are obvious, yes, sugary cereals, all that stuff, just really like zany 90s. I wasn't a fan of Gushers though, so we never bought those. It just was a weird surprise that I didn't want from a candy. But anyway, I just grew up with really terrible food. Now I have habits that are bad because I, you know, grew up with it, so it's like, ugh. I asked people on Twitter, is this the same case for you guys? And I have to say, I asked people who had Canadian American parents, and it was pretty much an overwhelming yes, I watched tons of TV, yes, I played lots of video games. Then I asked the immigrants, and I did 2 polls because one was not very good and the next one is not that good either, but it seems to be either 50-50 or kind of 75%, so there's still, it wasn't as much. It said to me that, yeah, there were people who grew up with immigrant parents who were not watching tons of TV and were not engaging in like video games and tons of media and pop culture. So I just wanted to share my experience with this because I'm just really curious curious about you guys. I'm asking now, I'm doing more qualitative work here. I want just to share your story. Did your parents basically just let you watch constant TV? Everybody is different, and this has nothing even to do with immigrant parents or Canadian parents. There are people who had American or Canadian parents who were very strict in terms of like not having, you know, you have to do your homework, you're not allowed to watch TV, blah, blah, blah. But it depends on the kid. So immigrant parent or not, sometimes it's just, if your kid shouldn't be watching that on TV, maybe you shouldn't be. But I got all my homework done and stuff, so my parents didn't really care. And the reason this gets brought up sometimes with friends is I'll make a comment about like a 90s show or, you know, whatever. And then I'll have the friend who is raised by a Canadian parent like me who's like, oh yeah, I used to watch that show. And then I'll have a friend who had an immigrant parent and they will have no idea what I'm talking about because they didn't watch it because they didn't have TV or whatever. And I get it. Obviously, tons of people my age had immigrant parents and had cable and played video games. So I know that this is just, it's sort of generalizing, but I am actually legitimately curious how people who were raised, and I know not everybody who watches my channel is in North America, but I'm just really curious because it's just a fun topic to me. So I'm just curious, for people who are in the millennial generation who grew up in North America, is this the case for you? I'd also want to know if you aren't a millennial and you are like a Gen Z or you're before me and you're Gen X or older, whatever, is that also the case? And if you're from another country, what happened there? Just let me know. Because when I talk with my husband, it makes me think, wow, I ate worse than you and consumed a lot of screen time, like more than him. That's not to say the only thing I did as a kid was stare at a screen, but I did watch a lot of TV. I definitely watched a lot of TV, and there are like things like, you know, I just grew up in Canada, YTV was a big kids channel, so YTV, constant, and then later on in childhood, Teletoon was a thing, Family Channel, always watching like PBS, all the good stuff. So anyway, it's interesting because he didn't grow up that way. He just did not grow up watching like Mr. Rogers. We went and saw the Mr. Rogers documentary recently, and it was really good. But it was interesting because he's watching a documentary about a person he really didn't grow up with at all, versus me. I watched it all the time. I even have video footage of me watching it. So I definitely, it's just interesting. And then another reason that inspired me to do this was we had friends over the other day, and one of our friends also has parents who were immigrants, and we had mentioned that we saw the Mr. Rogers documentary, and she didn't really know who Mr. Rogers was because she did not grow up with it. And again, this is somebody who's the same age as me, living in Canada, and like for me, it's like, how do you grow up in Canada and not know who Mr. Rogers is, or a lot of these other shows, like, and I don't know why. And then our other friend who was there, who had grown up in Canada, was like, yeah, of course he watched it. And then I mentioned Magic School Bus, and of course he watched it, and then she did not. So it was just super interesting, just seeing the division, I suppose. I'm just so curious to hear from everybody else about what their experience was, because I know we're all unique and we all have different experiences, but my guess is that just as North Americans, we were just like all over TV and all about them snacks. So I just want to know, because I'm just really curious, and I always find stuff like this interesting, comparing, you know, how people grew up and generational studies, and it's really interesting to me. Just, I don't know, just really is. I'll see you guys in the next video, and until then, see you later.